Hello, everybody, and today I am going to be talking about Let's Pretend This Never Happened by Jenny Lawson. I'm trying to get it without some glare on it. Jenny Lawson is the author of this book. It is, as you can see, a mostly true memoir, so it is her writing a book about her life. It's not a series, it's just a one-off. Well, she does have a second book. That is another standalone book. She does reference a couple of things in this one. Her other book is Furiously Happy. And like I said, she does reference some stuff from this book, but generally speaking, I mean, they're completely standalone. You could read this one all by itself. You could read the other one all by itself, and it's fine. This is mostly true. So, being that she calls it mostly true, I'm not totally sure if I should be labeling this purely as nonfiction, but she presents it in the book like it's nonfiction. I mean, she's got, let's see if I can, she's got all kinds of pictures of stuff that she's talking about. Lots of pictures. So her life is extraordinary in the fact that there's stuff that you're like, there's no way. And then you turn the page and you're like, oh, well, there's a picture of it. Okay. And I understand that pictures are not indelible proof of anything, but I understand why she calls it a mostly true memoir. And I don't know if it's just satire because nobody truly remembers their entire life. Honestly, you remember it the way you remember it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's actually how it happened. So I don't know if that's just satire on that or if she's like, I just made some of these things up. She never clarifies. She, like I said, she presents it like this is actually how it happened. Some iced coffee. So, yeah, I'm gonna call it nonfiction, and with that caveat, you can decide whether you agree or not. That's fine. I don't, if you disagree, more power to you. That's totally fine. This book, we're gonna analyze it the same way we analyze the other ones. We're gonna talk about pacing and characterization and storyline and frame and tone. But it's gonna be a little bit different just because it is nonfiction and she's talking about her own life. So pacing is really quickly revealed. She writes the book. Each chapter is basically a different story about something that's happened to her. So it's done in little vignettes. It's not one continuous story, which makes it really, really quick pacing wise because you read 10 pages and you've completed a story. So pacing's really quick. There's tons of dialogue. I wouldn't say she relies on pictures for description, but she definitely throws in pictures to aid in description whenever she can. This is a very quick read. I think I read this in like 2 days, 1 day, something like that. For characterization, she walks you through growing up and getting married and what life looks like after she's gotten married and moved out of her parents' house. And so you follow her along her entire life. So she's not, at no point is she like, here's what my personality was like or anything, typical characterization where you're trying to do character development. She's just like, here's this thing that happened when I was this old. So yeah. And then she's like, and then here's this other thing that happened at this point. So characterization is done in kind of a unique way. I mean, not necessarily unique for nonfiction, but different than most novels you would read, because she's just telling her story of growing up and you get to know her that way. So, character development is done over time throughout the book because you really get to know her as she grows up. And then there are other characters. Her dad is super key to the entire book and how she grew up and some of the weird stuff that has happened to her. And then her husband, I mean, this is her story about her life. And obviously her husband plays a huge role in her life now. So her husband and her father both are huge characters in the book. So it's not just about her. It's about her interaction with her family and meeting her husband and how they got together and that sort of thing. The storyline definitely emphasizes people. I mean, that's the whole point. But there are some weird things in this book. Weird things that she had a really, really strange life growing up. And it has continued to be maybe moderately less weird since now she's not living with her parents who instigated a bunch of the weirdness. But, she's definitely a very, very quirky person. And the situation there, while the book emphasizes her and her family, there are a lot of really weird situations in the book. A lot of weird situations. So, for example, one of the chapters is her and her husband having an argument via Post-it note. So each paragraph represents a different Post-it note. So while it is emphasizing the people, it is a weird situation. You're not going to find in any other book. So, you're going to get quirky characters and very strange situations. So the storyline is her life. And she has overcome some stuff. And she doesn't really sugarcoat it. And it's funny because I finished this book the first time. And I was like, man, that book was hilarious. And then I reread it and I was like, oh, what? There's several chapters on some really terrible things that have happened to her. Some struggles with some really intense mental health issues. Some struggles with physical. She's got a bunch of physical ailments that have really hindered her in her life. And she's super frank and talks about those. And I completely missed that the first time I read through the book because she's so funny when she talks that I didn't even miss that there's a bunch of really dark stuff that she's like raw about. So this is, I would say there's a lot of issues that are addressed in this book. It's not just her being like, here's my story, but here's my story about how I've survived through this stuff. And I think it's important to know that going in, because if you don't, somehow it's entirely possible to read through the whole book and completely miss that any of that was discussed. And also because that may be a trigger for some people, or that might be something you're looking for to be able to say, these are things I'm struggling with. I need to know if anyone else has ever dealt with that too. So she touches on stuff. She doesn't, like I said, she doesn't sugarcoat it. And yet somehow she presents it in a way where you feel better for reading about it. I will warn you, I should have said this earlier, there is very strong language in this book. She is conversational. Her writing is very conversational and she swears. So it's not for shock factor, it's just the way she talks. So if you're someone who is not about the swearing, she swears a lot. She has a blog. It's called The Bloggess. If you're curious if you would be interested in the book, maybe go read a blog post, because I mean, this is basically just, she was writing the blog first and then basically compiled some stuff from the blog and put it into a book. So, you definitely get more in the book than you would just reading through some of the blog posts, but you can get a feel for if you're interested in her writing style or not, or if the swearing is going to be too much for you or whatever by skimming her blog posts. And I'll link, I'll put a link to her blog down below. The frame and tone, she grew up in a super tiny town in, I believe it was Texas. So for the most part, the frame is a super tiny town in Texas. And the tone is, I mean, if you're being honest and reading it and really paying attention, it's really bittersweet. Like, she's gone through some stuff, like I said, but she's so humorous about it that if you're not paying attention, you don't even realize that you're like, oh man, she like really went through some stuff. So I wrote bittersweet down here. And I don't even, like, I think that's appropriate because she talks about loss and things like that, but she can still hold a sense of humor. So, not bittersweet in the fact that it's depressing, but bittersweet in the fact that she has come through some of this. I mean, this is, the mental illness is like an ongoing struggle, but she's made it through some of the stuff and is on the other side and can look back and laugh. So, if you're someone who secretly watches The Bachelorette or other reality TV because you just like glimpses into other people's lives, or you're someone who feels like an outsider and wants to be able to connect with another outsider, or you're someone who just wants a good laugh, or you're someone who is struggling with some mental illness and wants to see how someone else has handled that, or so many other things. This is a book to read. Let's Pretend It Never Happened, a mostly true memoir by Jenny Lawson. I have not listened to this on audiobook. I would very much recommend doing the actual book because, like I said, there's pictures of this. Well, me flipping through it is, but there's pictures through this whole thing. And I think if you do an audiobook, you're going to miss out on some of that. I mean, if, an audiobook is for time constraints or visibility constraints or whatever, the way that you need to read a book, it's still definitely worth reading. But if those aren't issues for you, no access problems, no time constraints, you actually have time to read before you go to bed or whatever, I would recommend doing the actual print book. I mean, ebook probably would work too. I would imagine the pictures are in there, but not the audio version. So that's Let's Pretend This Never Happened by Jenny Lawson. And until next time, happy reading.